Story 1. This happened on Christmas Day 2 years ago, and every December since then. It plays in my head like a movie I never asked to be in. I was 17 that year, living with my parents in a nice little subdivision, Oregon. That Christmas was picture perfect. Fresh snow, blue sky in the morning, and that soft pink glow as the sun went down. Inside, though, it was chaos. My family goes huge for Christmas. I'm talking about cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everybody stuffed into our house like clowns in a car, kids running around with frosting on their faces, my grandma yelling at my uncle about putting too much salt in the gravy, and random Christmas movies playing in the background with the volume too low to actually hear. I'm the emo antisocial one in the family, so most of the day I just floated around the edges. I helped put food out, faked laugh at small cans, hid in the kitchen whenever I could. That's where I was when I first saw him. My cousin Jenna walked in with a guy, and nobody had ever seen before. She was glowing in a way that girls get when they bring a new boyfriend around. He was older, mid-30s easily, too old for her in my opinion. He had this short beard, slicked hair, and a Christmas sweater that would have looked normal on anyone else, but looked like a costume on him. The first thing I noticed was his eyes. He didn't scan the room like a normal person does. He locked on to me. I was just standing there by the counter, slicing store-bought pumpkin pie, and felt his gaze hit me like a spotlight. It wasn't a curious look. It wasn't even a, "Oh, who's that?" It felt like I was being sized up. I looked away, busying myself with my plate. "This is Dave," Jenna said, dragging him over to my mom. "We've been dating for a couple of months." My mom did her usual thing. Hug, smile, nice to meet you. Welcome to the madhouse. Everybody laughed. He laughed too, but it sounded off like he'd practiced it. I kept my head down, but every time I glanced up, he was watching me. Later, when everybody was in the living room opening gifts, I sat on the floor by the far wall, half behind the tree, scrolling through my phone with my headphones on, but no music playing. I saw him move through the room, talking to different people, laughing and shaking hints, but he circled back to me over and over. He'd stand just close enough that I knew he was there. Then he'd lean down, pretend to be interested in something near me, and start a conversation. "So, you're Jenna's cousin?" he asked at one point, kneeling next to me like we were buddies. I could smell cheap cologne and something sour underneath it. "Yeah," I said. "You look different from the rest of them," he said, eyes drifting over my clothes, my hair and my face, in a good way. "I like your style." Yep, I knew he was a creep all along. This is why I don't care when people judge me for always trusting my gut. I didn't answer. I moved to sit with my younger cousins instead, pretending to help them open toys, but he followed. Every time I relocated to the kitchen, to the hallway, to the dining room, he'd appear a few minutes later. He kept trying to joke with me, calling me mysterious, and other weird, corny things, asking me if I had a boyfriend, what kind of music I liked, and if I ever snuck out at night. Stuff that might sound normal if somebody your own age said it, but straight up wrong, coming from a guy pushing 40. The final straw was when everybody was grabbing dessert, and I was alone in the hallway for a second, picking tape off my fingers from wrapping paper. He stepped in front of me, blocking the way, and smiled. "You know you're going to be trouble when you're older. Is greater than, he said. Eyes never leave my face. If you're not already, my stomach flipped. My mind instantly went to what the fuck. I'm already older, I said, and I'm not interested. He laughed quietly and leaned a little closer. I didn't say you had to be interested to have fun. That's when I snapped out of my usual just ignore people mode. If you don't back off, I said, looking him right in the eyes. I'm telling my parents that you're creeping on me. For a second, his smile dropped, just gone. His eyes changed like he was angry I'd said it out loud. Then he smirked and stepped back. Relax, he said. I'm just joking around. Don't be so serious. After that, he mostly left me alone, He still stared sometimes, but he didn't corner me again. I told myself not to make it a bigger deal than it had to be. My cousin looked happy. The adults were laughing, and kids were running around showing off their new toys. I decided not to tell my parents. It was late. Everybody was full and tired, and I didn't want to start some big family fight on Christmas. I brushed it off the way I always do. People started leaving around 9. There were hugs and drive safe and see you next year at the door. I watched from the stairs as Jenna and Dave left. He glanced up once, met my eyes, and gave me a little two-fingered wave, but I pretended not to see it. By 10:30, the house was quiet. My parents were cleaning up the kitchen, and I went upstairs to my room. Snow was still falling outside, thick and slow, and I was just thankful it was all over. A window faced the street, and the view honestly looked like something from a movie. I put on my headphones and put on some 3 Days Grace, and flopped on my bed with a book I probably wasn't actually going to read. I turned the volume up, letting the music drown out the last thoughts and drama of family noise I had going through my head. That's why I wasn't sure at first if I actually heard it. A small tap on the glass behind my head. I paused the song, listening. My heart picked up a little, but I told myself it was probably just a tree branch or something shifting in the wind. I turned the music back on. Maybe 5 minutes later, I heard it again. It was slightly louder, though. I sat up this time. My bed is pushed right up against the window, so the glass is basically the headboard. I turned around and looked at the window. It was fogged over from the difference between the warm air inside and the freezing air outside. Couldn't see anything except the fuzzy glow of one of the nearby streetlights. Probably nothing, I said to myself, even though I knew houses don't knock 3 times in a row. I'll admit, I was freaked out deep down, but I just wanted so badly to be overreacting that I eventually believed it. I slid off the bed and stood up, leaning closer. I wiped a circle in the condensation with a sleeve of my hoodie. First, all I could see was the street covered in snow, the sidewalks, the rows of houses across from ours, lights off except a few porch lights. Then I saw him. A figure standing on the sidewalk down the street a little bit. He had a dark jacket on, jeans, and a posture slouched slightly like he'd been standing there for a while. He was facing my house. His head was angled upward toward my window. Even from that distance, even in the dark, I recognized the outline. Dave. I dropped my sleeve from the glass like it was hot and stumbled backward. Heart pounding so hard I thought it would beat out of my chest. I grabbed the blinds and yanked them shut, then shut off my lamp so the room went dark. I stood there for a minute, pressed against the wall, listening. I considered going downstairs and telling my parents right then, but some stubborn part of me said, what if you're overreacting? What if it's not even him? The idea of explaining, hey, that guy who creeped me out earlier is standing on our street, felt insane. So I watched for the next 20 or 30 minutes. I sneaked to the edge of the blinds, lift one slat, and peek out. Most times, I saw nothing but swirling snow. Sometimes I thought I saw movement, but it was probably just flicks catching the light. Eventually, the sidewalk looked empty. The panic dulled the nervous energy. I told myself he'd left, that it really was just my imagination, or some random neighbor walking their dog earlier. Who knows? I went back to my bed, turned on my lamp again, and tried to actually read my book. Headphones sat around my neck. Music off this time. I think it was close to midnight when it happened. A sudden, violent bang against the window, right above my head. The glass rattled, and the sound was so loud and so close that I screamed without even meaning to. It wasn't a tap this time. It was both hands slamming into the glass. Is greater than, hey, is greater than a muffled voice called through the window, way too close. Is greater than, open up. Is greater than. I scrambled off the bed, my legs almost giving out, and bolted for the door. I didn't even stop to look. I didn't want to see his face that close, on the other side of the glass. My whole body was shaking as I yanked my bedroom door open and sprinted down the hall. I ran out of my room and started yelling, "Dad!" my voice cracking. "Somebody's at my window." My dad came out of his room at the same time my mom did, both of them half asleep and confused. The look on my face must have told them that this wasn't a joke. My dad didn't ask more than where, and I just pointed toward my room. "Stay with your mom," he said, already heading down the stairs. I watched from the top as he went to the gun safe in the hallway closet, punched in the cold with shaking fingers, and grabbed his handgun and a flashlight. He didn't even bother with a coat, just his pajama pants and a t-shirt. He went out the back door instead of the front, probably hoping to catch whoever it was off guard. My mom had her phone out, hands trembling as she dialed 911. I stood by the upstairs window in the hallway, peeking through the blinds that looked out over the backyard. The world outside was white and dark and silent. Then my dad's flashlight beam cut across the yard. It landed on a figure standing a few feet from my bedroom window. Dave. He was just standing there. No hat, no gloves, breath fogging in the air. When the light hit him, he squinted and lifted a hand, like the brightness annoyed him more than being caught did. "What the hell are you doing here?" my dad shouted. Even through the glass, I heard Dave's answer. "I'm sorry, man," he said like he'd misplaced a phone, not to talk to the teenage girl. "I don't know. I needed to talk to her." My dad moved closer, gun pointed down, but ready. "Talk to my daughter at midnight at her bedroom window." Dave laughed softly. That same fake laugh from earlier in the day. "She's special. I love her, and I want to marry her. You can sign for her, right? Parent consent. That's all it takes." My mom gasped beside me and flying to her mouth. My dad snapped, "Get on the ground. You absolute psycho," he yelled. Now, Dave shook his head like my dad was being unreasonable. "You don't understand." "She gets it," my dad launched. The flashlight beam jerked wildly as he tackled Dave into the snow. I lost sight of them for a second and just heard grunts and the crunch of boots and knees digging to the frozen grounds. Then the light settled and I could see my dad on top of him, pinning his arms behind his back with his knee. "Call the cops," he shouted, though my mom already was. The next few minutes felt like an hour. My dad stayed on him, not letting him move, barking at him to shut up every time he tried to talk. I caught pieces of what Dave said. Stuff about meant to be, and she's different, and Christmas miracle. It made my skin crawl. When the police finally pulled up, lights flashing blue and red across the snow, my legs almost gave out from relief. 2 officers ran into the yard, shouting commands. My dad got off him slowly, hands raised, explaining who he was. They cuffed Dave, patted him down, and pulled stuff from his pockets. I watched from the window as they set things on the hood of the patrol car. Little plastic baggies, condoms, more than one knife, a stack of IDs with different names and pictures. One of the officers noticed me staring front of the window and gave me a quick, serious nod. The kind of nod that said, "You did the right thing." Dave was trespassed from our property and taken away that night. We gave statements until almost 3 in the morning. I heard bits and pieces later. Meth, fake IDs, warrants, but I never found out the full story of what happened to him in court. What I do know is this. If he'd waited until my parents went to sleep, if I'd opened the window even an inch, if I'd kept second-guessing myself instead of screaming and running for my dad, this might be a completely different story. And yes, for those wondering, my cousin broke up with him immediately and cut off all contact. Story 2. This happened on Christmas Eve, 2 years ago, and I still can't hear a knock at the door after dark without my stomach dropping. I was 26 at the time, freshly back in my hometown after moving out of an apartment with my ex. My parents had gone to Florida to spend Christmas with my sister and her kids, and I'd volunteered to stay behind and wash the house, water the plants, and make sure the pipes didn't freeze. It's one of those quiet suburban streets where every house has the same plastic candy canes along the walkway. the same glowing reindeer on the lawn, and the same wreath on the door. My parents go all out every year. Their front bushes were wrapped in lights. There was a glowing Merry Christmas sign on the window, and inside, the place looked like a Hallmark set. Tree in the corner, stockings on the mantle, cinnamon candle burning on the coffee table. It felt cozy and safe. That night, I did what I always do when I'm alone on holidays. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me. I made myself a frozen pizza, poured a couple glasses of wine, and put on a Christmas movie marathon. I FaceTimed my parents for a bit, held the phone up to the tree so my mom could gush over the ornaments, and then they went back to their warm rental in Florida, and I went back to my quiet living room in the Michigan cold. By 9:30, it was snowing steadily. The street outside was dead. No cars passing, no kids playing, just that muffled silence you only get during a snowstorm. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message. Package delivered, the notification said. I frowned because I hadn't ordered anything. I opened the message all the way. It showed a blurry night photo of a front porch, my parents' front porch. I hadn't heard the doorbell, but sometimes delivery drivers don't ring it, so I shrugged it off, slipped on my slippers, and went to the front hall. I flicked on the porch light and looked through the people. There was no package, just a man. He was standing on the porch facing slightly away from the door, cut up, shoulders dusted with snow. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just relatively dark clothing and work boots. One gloved hand was in his pocket, the other was holding his phone screen, going blue against his beard. As soon as I looked, he turned like he somehow felt it. He smiled and stepped closer to the door. I stepped back from instinct, even though there was still a solid door between us. The doorbell rang. He jabbed it like 3 or 4 times, rapidly. I cleared my throat. Can I help you? I called through the door. Yeah. Package for, I heard paper crinkle for Miller. This address, right? Must have gone to the wrong house. Just need a signature. My parents' last name is Miller, but I never told him that. That's okay, I said. You can just leave it. He laughed softly. It didn't sound like a delivery guy's laugh, if that makes sense. It sounded annoyed. Come on, man. It's alcohol. I need a signature. You don't want this going back to the warehouse. Trust me. Something about the way he said warehouse made my skin crawl. No company name, no tablet, no clearly visible package. I'm good, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You've got the wrong house. Then his tone changed. Not angry, but like flatter. All right, he said. Merry Christmas, then. I heard footsteps retreat down the porch steps. I waited a good 30 seconds, then peeked through the peephole again. He was still there, not on the porch, but in the yard now, standing by our little light-up reindeer. He had his back to the house, head turned toward the street like he was watching or waiting for something. The porch light only caught the edge of his face, but I could see enough to tell he wasn't actually looking at the decorations. He was watching the houses, watching which ones were dark, which ones were full. It's hard to say at the time, but it felt weird. I backed away from the door for a few seconds. I considered calling the non-emergency police line, but it felt stupid. Guy standing outside doesn't sound that serious when you try to explain it. I told myself that he was just some sketchy private sire, turned off the foyer light and went back to the couch. The movie played on, but I wasn't really watching anymore. Every now and then, I muted it and listened. Nothing out of the ordinary. By 11 o'clock, I decided I freaked myself out enough. I did a quick walkthrough of the house, checked the back sliding door, the kitchen door to the garage, and the windows. Locked. All good. I turned off the lights downstairs, leaving only the Christmas tree on, and went upstairs to the guest room I've been sleeping in. Lying in bed, scrolling my phone, I kind of convinced myself I'd overreacted. People stand outside sometimes. Not everybody is a serial killer just because their jacket isn't branded, I guess. I eventually dozed off. I don't know how long I was asleep when I woke up to a sound that at first my half-dreaming brain tried to explain away, like something metal lightly hitting glass, distant, dull, but inside the house. I held my breath. The house settled. The heater kicked on. Nothing else. I checked my phone at about 1:43 a.m. I think. I told myself it was just the heater or ice shifting on the roof. Rolled over and closed my eyes until I heard it again, this time with a scratch as well. I knew now it was undeniably from downstairs, and close, not through a wall. All the drowsiness vanished. I sat up, every sense suddenly tuned in. I could see the faint glow of the tree reflecting up the stairwell from under my door, so I knew the living room was still lit. I swung my legs out of bed and stood as quietly as I could, padding over to the door in my socks. I gently pressed my ear against it. For a few seconds, I heard nothing. Then, very clearly, the unmistakable sound of the back sliding door, shaking. The vertical blinds rattled softly. Then, a hard, subtle thumping as somebody tested the lock from outside. My heart started racing in that sickening way where it feels like it's beating against your throat. Every instinct in me screamed, "Don't go down there." So, I didn't. I backed away from the door, grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and dialed 911, shaking. The operator answered, and I did my best to keep my voice low. "Somebody's trying to get into my house," I whispered. "From the back door. I'm upstairs." She asked my address, my name, and if I was alone. I told her. I could hear her typing, her voice calm. "Stay on the line with me, okay? Officers are on the way." Downstairs, the rattling stopped. For a few seconds, the silence was worse. Then came a new sound, a dull thud like a shoulder hitting the door. Once, twice, and something else. Metal scraping. Tools, I thought. "Sir, are you in a locked room?" the operator asked. "Yes, upstairs bedroom, doors locked." "Good, stay there, don't confront them." I wanted to say no worries, I'm not a hero, but my mouth was dry. One more heavy thought echoed through the house. Then an awful cracking noise. Wood maybe, or plastic, I didn't know. But the next sound I recognized instantly. The subtle rubbery whoosh of the sliding door opening. The house went still after that in a way that was somehow even more terrifying than the noise. The heater clicked off, and I could hear nothing but the dispatcher and my own breathing. Then, finally, footsteps. Not trying to be quiet, but not stomping either. They crossed the tile in the kitchen, then transitioned onto the wood in the dining room. Every step got a little clearer as they moved toward the living room. I could picture it in my head, that guy from the porch, standing in front of the glowing tree, looking at the presents under it, looking at the family photos on the wall, looking up the stairs. "I hear footsteps inside," I whispered. "They're almost there," the operator said. "Just stay calm and hidden." I moved away from the door and into the walk-in closet attached to the guest room. It was packed with my mom's old clothes, extra blankets, and boxes of decorations. I squeezed myself into the far corner, behind a hanging row of coats, and tried to breathe quietly. Below me, a drawer slid open. Something dropped. The footsteps moved closer to the base of the stairs. Each step up the staircase sounded heavier than the last. The wood creaked in that specific way I recognized from growing up in that house. Whoever was on the stairs was big. He paused about halfway up. For a second, I thought maybe he was listening. A phone screen was glowing faintly in my hands. I turned it face down and held my breath. The steps resumed, getting closer. Then I heard the slight shift and echo that told me he'd reached the top of the stairs and turn into the hallway right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob jiggled. He tried it once and twice, then a quiet chuckle. "Really?" A man's voice said softly, like he was talking to himself. The knob jiggled harder, and there was a sharp bang as he threw his shoulder into it. The thin, hollow corridor shuddered in his frame. I thought it would give.
When I was in college,
I flinched and almost dropped my phone. "Sir," the operator whispered in my ear. "Are they at your door?" Yes, I mouthed more than I spoke. "Officers are close. You're doing good. Just stay where you are." Another
I turned
hit.
around to see
The
if
door
someone was there,
groaned.
but nobody
One of the
was.
hinges made a tiny popping
Poking at my
sound.
ears,
This
I
wasn't
listened.
going to hold forever.
Nothing,
In that
except the usual
moment,
sounds of the
I
woods.
genuinely
Even
thought
so,
I
the
might
strong
have to
impression
fight this
remained
guy.
that someone was
I
staring
looked
at me.
around the dark closet.
I
There was
sighed
nothing
in
remotely
exasperation at
weapon-like,
myself.
except
Nobody
maybe a
was
metal
there,
clothes
so
rod,
nobody could
but
be
it was
watching me.
bolted into the
I
wall.
turned
My
back
eyes
around and
landed
gave
on a
stare.
heavy snow boot on the
A guy
floor,
was
and my
standing about
brain
100
offered
feet
up
down
the
the trail,
brilliant
completely
suggestion of throwing
motionless,
it at
staring
him.
at me.
I almost
I
laughed
couldn't
from
see
the
his face that
adrenaline.
well,
The man
but he was
paused
close
between
enough so that I
hits,
could see
and
he
I
was
heard him
smiling.
breathing on the other side
It
of
was
the
not a
door.
friendly smile.
We were maybe
It
6
reminded
foot
me of an evil
apart,
clown
with an
smile
inch of
without the
wood
makeup.
separating us.
I waited a few
Then,
seconds
faint
to
and
see if
far
he moved,
away,
but
at
he didn't.
first,
He
I
stood
heard it.
absolutely still, the
Sirens.
smile
The man
unmoving.
heard them too.
It made me
There
feel
was a
really
muttered
uneasy.
curse,
I didn't know
then
what else to
hurried
do, so
footsteps
I
down the
decided to
hall,
acknowledge him with a
pounding
little
down the
wave.
stairs and the
He
slam
didn't
of
wave
the
back.
sliding
He just
door.
kept staring at me.
Sirens? I whispered.
By this time, my
Yes,
uneasiness
that's
had ramped
them,
up to the
the
next
operator
level.
said.
I wanted
They're
to walk
outside.
away, but I didn't
Stay
want to turn my
put
back.
until an officer
I
tells
also
you
didn't
it's
want to go
safe to come
towards him.
out.
The
I heard
safest route
multiple
seemed to be to
voices
walk parallel
outside,
to him.
then pounding
It
on
would
the
mean
front
getting off the
door.
trail, but at
This
least I could keep
is
him
the
in my peripheral
police.
vision.
Anyone
In a
inside,
split
call
second, I
out
turned to
now.
get off the
I
trail.
finally
A
stepped out of the
stranger
closet, legs shaking,
I looked all
so
around me,
badly I
but
had
there
to
was no
steady
sign of
myself
anyone.
on the dresser. I
Instead
opened
of
the
feeling
bedroom door
relieved, I
carefully.
felt even
It
more
stuck
uneasy.
halfway.
Was he
The
hiding
frame
somewhere,
splintered
creeping
where the
behind
man
trees?
had hit it, but it opened
It's
enough for
probably
me to
just someone
squeeze
trying to be
out.
funny, I told
I crept to
myself.
the top of the
I started
stairs,
picking up my
hands up,
pace,
and
trying
called
to look as
out.
casual as
I'm
possible,
upstairs.
because I was
I
sure he
live
was still
here.
watching.
2 officers came into
I
view
wasn't
in the
too far
living
from my
room,
dorm at
guns
first.
drawn,
I got back
flashlights
on the trail.
sweeping.
I'd
They
only been in the
holstered
woods a
them
few
when they saw
minutes.
I was alone,
I
and it's
turned around
clearly
just to make
not the
sure
guy
he
they
wasn't
were
there.
looking for.
Drawing my breath in,
Downstairs,
I
the
saw him
living
fall
room looked
behind me,
strangely
standing
violated.
motionless,
The
the
tree was
smile
still
visible on his
glowing
lips.
peacefully, but the
I
sliding
started
door
walking
at the
even
back of the
faster,
house
although I
was
tried to keep
standing
myself
half
looking back.
open.
I
Cold
kept
air
imagining him
pouring
coming up from
in.
behind me,
The lock had
reaching
been
out his
pried
hands to
clean
strangle
off,
me and
the
smile.
frame chipped and shredded.
Finally, I
Wet
stole a
boot
glance
prints
over my
led from the
shoulder.
deck to the
He was
kitchen,
gone.
across the
I was
floor to the
practically
base of the
out of the woods,
stairs.
emerging
They
into the
walked me
sunlight.
through the
I'd never been
house,
so happy
while
to see
other
my dorm
officers
building.
checked around the
I broke
property.
into a
Nothing
run.
obvious
I
was
didn't care if the
missing.
guy
My
saw me at this
laptop
point.
was still on the coffee
Punching in
table.
the
The
code of the
TV
door,
was on
I
the
looked one
wall,
last
and my
time
wallet
over
was
the woods, half
upstairs.
expecting
But
to
in
see
the
him standing at
kitchen,
the edge.
one drawer was
He
left
wasn't.
open. That's where my
Feeling
dad
much
keeps
better,
the
I went up to
knives.
my room.
One
Opening my
was
door, I saw my
missing.
roommate,
That was
looking
probably
out
the
the
worst
window
part to
towards the
find
woods.
out.
You
Later,
don't see
when
me out
everything
there, do
settled
you? I
down
asked,
and the
as I
adrenaline
just
gave
had
way
the
to
creepiest thing
exhaustion,
happen.
one of the officers
He
told
turned to
me
look at
there
me,
had been
and
a
I realized
string
it
of
wasn't my
Christmas Eve
roommate. It was
burglaries
him,
last
still
couple of
staring and
years.
smiling.
Houses that were clearly decorated, clearly had gifts, and looked empty. A lot of them had older folks living there who were out of town visiting family. You probably saw your parents leave and assumed the place would be vacant all week. The officer said, "Saw the lights. Maybe watch the house for a while. Wrong place, wrong time for him that you stayed." I thought about the guy on the porch with a fake package, testing to see if anyone would open up. The time delivery notification, the fact that he knew the last name before I'd ever confirmed it. I also thought about how easy it would have been to just crack the door, sign some fake form, and let him put one foot inside. To this day, I'm grateful I didn't. My parents replaced the door, added cameras, and got a security system. They double-check every lock religiously down. I still house it for them, but I don't try to play it cool anymore. If anything feels off, I call somebody. I check the cameras. I turn on more lights than I probably need. As every Christmas Eve, when the street goes quiet and the snow deadens every sound, I always find myself listening once the movies are off and the house is dark. Story 3. On December 18th, 2017, a judge sentenced Victor Holloway to 18 months in state prison, and I finally remembered what it felt like to exhale. My high school graduating class had their 10-year reunion that fall, and while everyone else was sharing photos of their kids and promotions, I was just grateful to be breathing without checking the locks 3 times before bed. We had been together since I turned 24. And by the time the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, I had a crooked nose that never healed right, a restraining order he violated twice, and a collection of medical records thick enough to serve as evidence in court. I sat in that courtroom for 20 minutes after everyone left, just letting myself believe it was actually over. My hands were still, my breathing was normal, and for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I could exist in the world without constantly scanning for exits. 7 days until Christmas, and for once, the holiday season did not feel like a minefield. My friend Harper had been my lifeline through all of it. We met working at the same insurance office in Dayton, Ohio, back when my life still made sense. She had moved about 40 minutes north to a small town called Bellefontaine with her husband Greg a couple years prior, and she had been asking me to visit ever since. When she called me 3 days before Christmas and heard that I was planning to spend the holiday alone in my apartment eating frozen lasagna, she practically demanded I come stay with them. They were hosting a small gathering on Christmas night. She said just some neighbors and Greg's brother and his wife. Nothing fancy. I almost said no out of habit because saying no had become my default setting. But something in her voice made me pause. She reminded me that Victor was locked up, that I deserved to have one normal holiday, that I needed to start rebuilding. So I said yes. I packed a small bag that Friday morning, December 22nd, and drove north through light flurries, telling myself the whole way that this was what healing looked like. Harper and Greg lived in a 2-story colonial on Birch Lane, the kind of house with a wraparound porch and Christmas lights that actually matched. When I pulled into their driveway, Harper came running out in slippers and a cardigan, wrapping me in a hug before I even got my bag out of the trunk. She looked good, healthy, and happy in a way that made me realize how much weight I had lost over the past year. Greg waved from the doorway, holding their golden retriever by the collar so he would not bowl me over. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and there was a fire crackling in the living room. For the first 2 days, I did nothing but sleep, eat Harper's cooking, and watch terrible holiday movies on their couch. I did not check the windows. I did not sleep with my phone clutched in my hand. I did not flinch when Greg came around a corner unexpectedly. It felt like borrowing someone else's life, and I was terrified of how much I wanted to keep it. Christmas morning was quiet and slow. Harper made French toast with powdered sugar, and we exchanged small gifts by the tree while snow fell outside. I gave her a scarf I had knitted during all those nights I could not sleep, and she cried a little when she unwrapped it because she knew what those stitches represented. Greg's brother, Dennis, arrived around noon with his wife Lydia, and they brought enough food to feed a small army. The neighbors started trickling in around 4 o'clock. A retired couple named the Burks and a younger woman named Mia who worked at the local library. By 6 o'clock, the house was warm and loud with conversation, and someone had put on a playlist of old Christmas songs that made everything feel golden and safe. I stood in the kitchen helping Lydia arrange appetizers on a platter, and I remember thinking that this was what normal people did. This was what holidays were supposed to feel like. I had almost forgotten. Around 7:30, I stepped out onto the back porch to get some air. The house had gotten warm with all the bodies and the fireplace going, and I needed a moment to myself. The backyard was small and tidy, bordered by a wooden fence that separated it from the neighbors. Snow had been falling steadily all evening, and everything was covered in a thick white blanket that muffled the world. I stood there with my arms wrapped around myself, breathing in the cold and watching my breath turn to fog. From inside, I could hear laughter and the muffled sound of Bing Crosby singing about a white Christmas. I was about to go back in when I noticed movement at the far end of the yard near the gate that led to the side alley. It was dark back there, the porch light not reaching that far, but I could have sworn I saw a shape, a person maybe standing just beyond the fence. I squinted into the darkness, my heart picking up speed despite my best efforts to stay calm. But then, Mia opened the back door and asked if I wanted more wine, and when I looked again, there was nothing there. Just snow and shadows and my own paranoid imagination. I went back inside and tried to shake it off. 4 years of living in fear had rewired my brain to see threats everywhere, and I knew that my therapist had warned me about hypervigilance. about how my nervous system would need time to understand that the danger had passed. So I poured myself another glass of wine and rejoined the party, laughing at Greg's terrible jokes and listening to the Burkes tell stories about their grandchildren. But I kept drifting toward the windows. Every few minutes, I would find myself standing near the front of the house, looking out at Birch Lane through the gaps in the curtains. The street was quiet and empty, lined with other houses decorated for the holiday, their windows glowing with warm light. Nothing unusual, no one lurking in driveways or standing on corners, just a peaceful Christmas night in a small Ohio town. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Victor was in prison, 40 mi away, locked behind concrete and razor wire. He could not hurt me anymore. I repeated it like a mantra, but some part of me, some animal instinct buried deep in my chest, refused to believe it. It was almost 9 when I saw him. I had wandered into the front room to grab my phone from my purse, and as I straightened up, I glanced out the window facing the street. There, across the road, standing perfectly still on the sidewalk in front of a dark house, was a man. He was wearing a dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low, and he was staring directly at Harper and Greg's house, directly at the window where I was standing. The streetlight behind him cast his face in shadow, but I knew that silhouette. I knew the way he stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, the way he held his hands in his pockets, the specific tilt of his head when he was watching me. My whole body went rigid, every muscle locking into place like someone had flipped a switch. It was Victor. I knew it was Victor. Every cell in my body screamed his name. Even though my rational mind was insisting it was impossible, that he was in prison, that I was seeing things, but I was not seeing things. He was right there, not 50 feet away, watching me through the falling snow. I must have made some kind of sound, because Harper appeared at my side, and a moment later, she asked me what was wrong, and I pointed at the window, my finger trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. She looked, and I watched her face for the recognition, for the horror that I was feeling, but she just frowned and shook her head. She said she did not see anyone. I looked again, and the sidewalk was empty, just snow and darkness, and the faint glow of Christmas lights from the house across the street. Harper put her hand on my arm and asked if I was okay, and I could hear the concern in her voice, but also something else, something careful. She thought I was having some kind of episode, some trauma response, and maybe she was right. Maybe the stress of the holiday and being around so many people had triggered something. I apologized and said I was fine, just tired, just imagining things. She gave me a long look, but did not push it. She suggested I go lie down for a bit, take a break from the noise. I nodded and headed upstairs to the guest room, but I did not lie down. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, watching the street through the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The party continued downstairs, and I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and music drifting up through the floor. I told myself that if I did not see anything else, I would go back down and pretend everything was fine. I would chalk it up to exhaustion and too much wine and a brain that had been conditioned to expect danger around every corner. But then, at exactly 9:42, according to the clock on the nightstand, I saw him again. He had moved. He was no longer across the street, but standing at the edge of Harper's property, right where the driveway met the sidewalk, partially hidden behind the old oak tree in the front yard. The streetlight caught him just enough for me to see that he had taken off his cap. His hair was shorter than I remembered, buzzed close to his skull, and even from this distance, I could see he was smiling. Not a normal smile, the kind of smile he used to give me right before things got bad. The kind that said he knew something I did not, that he was enjoying my fear, that he had all the time in the world. I grabbed my phone and called 911. My voice was shaking so badly that the dispatcher asked me to repeat myself 3 times. I told her my ex was outside, that he was supposed to be in prison, that he had a history of violence, and I was afraid for my life. She told me to stay inside, stay away from windows, and that officers were on their way. I went downstairs and pulled Harper into the kitchen, away from the other guests. I told her I had called the police, that I had seen Victor again, that he was on the property. Her face went pale, and for the first time, she did not look at me like I was fragile or confused. She looked scared. Greg must have noticed something was wrong because he came in a moment later, and Harper quickly explained the situation in a low voice. He wanted to go outside and check, but I grabbed his arm and begged him not to. Victor had put 2 men in the hospital before we started dating, something I only found out later, and I could not stand the thought of Greg getting hurt because of me. We turned off the music and quietly told the other guests there was a situation, that the police were coming, that everyone should stay inside and away from the doors. The Burkes looked confused but compliant. Dennis kept asking what was going on, his voice too loud, and Lydia had to shush him. Mia pulled out her phone and started recording the front yard through the window, saying she wanted to get evidence if he showed up again. We all stood there in the living room, the Christmas tree lights blinking cheerfully in the corner, waiting for the sound of sirens. The police arrived in under 10 minutes, 2 cruisers with their lights flashing red and blue against the snow. I watched from the window as 4 officers got out and began searching the property with flashlights, checking behind the oak tree, walking the perimeter of the fence, shining their beams into the alley behind the house. They found footprints in the snow, fresh ones leading from the sidewalk to the oak tree, and then back toward the street where they disappeared near a set of tire tracks. One of the officers, a woman with short gray hair and a calm, steady voice, came inside to take my statement. I told her everything, starting with who Victor was and what he had done to me and when he was supposed to have been sentenced. She wrote it all down without interrupting, her expression neutral but not unkind. When I finished, she stepped outside to make a phone call. I could see her through the window, pacing back and forth on the porch, her breath visible in the cold air. She was on the phone for a long time. When she came back in, her face had changed. There was something tight around her eyes, something that looked a lot like anger, barely held in check. She asked me to sit down, and I knew before she said anything that I had not been imagining things. She explained it slowly, like she was choosing each word with care. There had been an administrative error at the state facility where Victor was being held. Some kind of mix-up with paperwork related to a holiday release program that was supposed to apply only to non-violent offenders serving sentences under 6 months. Victor did not qualify on either count, but somehow his name had ended up on the list. He had been released on unsupervised leave 3 days earlier on December 22nd, the same day I drove to Bellefontaine. No one had notified me because no one had realized the mistake until she called it in. The officer told me they would find him, that every unit in the county was being alerted, that I should stay with my friends and not go back to my apartment in Dayton until they had him in custody. She gave me her card and told me to call if I saw anything else. After the police left, I sat on Harper's couch wrapped in a blanket, unable to stop shivering even though the heat was on. The guests had all gone home. Greg was checking every lock in the house for the 3rd time. Harper sat next to me, holding my hand, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. Victor had tracked me here. He had known exactly where I was, 40 minutes from home, in a town I had never visited before. The officer mentioned later when she called to update me that they found a tracking app on his phone. When they finally arrested him 2 days later at a gas station outside Columbus, he had installed something on my phone months ago before the trial, and I had never known. He had been watching me the whole time, even from prison, even on Christmas. I still have the same phone number because the police said changing it would not matter, that men like Victor always find another way. Sometimes I think about that night, about how close he was, about what might have happened if I had stepped outside alone, or if the police had taken longer to arrive. I do not have an answer for why he did not try to come inside. Maybe he was waiting for me to be alone. Maybe he just wanted me to know he could reach me whenever he wanted. I moved to a different state 6 months later, and I have not been back to Ohio since. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. Some habits, it turns out, are there to keep you alive. Story 4. Hannah was triple checking the thermostat when I spotted him through the living room window. A guy in a full Santa Claus costume walking down our sidewalk with a big red velvet bag over his shoulder, waving at neighbors like he owned the place. We live in this quiet subdivision outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of neighborhood where people still put up inflatable snowmen and string lights along their gutters every year. My wife and I were about to hit the road for her parents' house in South Carolina, a 5-hour drive we made every Christmas since we got married. I had turned 34 that October, and after 6 years of making that trip, the routine was pretty much automatic by then. Pack the car, set the timers on the lights, adjust the heat, lock up, and go. That Saturday morning, 2 days before Christmas Eve, everything felt normal. The sun was bright, the frost was melting off the grass, and Santa was making his rounds. He looked completely authentic, and I mean that. Red suit with white fur trim, shiny black boots, a thick white beard that could have been real for all I knew. He had a friendly face, the kind of guy who looked like he genuinely enjoyed playing the part. I watched him hand a candy cane to one of the Lawson kids from 3 houses down, then pose for a photo with their mom holding up her phone. Other neighbors were outside too, grabbing Amazon boxes from their porches or hanging last-minute decorations, and everyone seemed happy to see him. I figured he was doing some kind of charity thing, maybe from one of the churches on the main road, or a local business trying to spread holiday cheer. Hannah joined me at the window and smiled, saying it was nice to see people still doing stuff like that. We stood there for maybe a minute, watching him move down the street, completely oblivious to what he was actually doing. He made his way to our house about 10 minutes later. I was in the garage, loading a cooler into the trunk when I heard the jingling. He had actual bells attached to his belt, which I thought was a nice touch at the time. I stepped out and he gave me this big warm smile, held out a candy cane, and said something like, "Merry Christmas, neighbor," in a deep, friendly voice. We ended up chatting for a few minutes right there in the driveway. He asked if we were heading out for the holidays, and I told him, yeah, driving down to see family for the week. He nodded and said half the street seemed to be doing the same thing, that it was nice to see people still making the effort to be together for Christmas. I remember thinking what a genuine guy he seemed to be. He asked about the drive, how long it would take when we were planning to leave. I answered every single question without a second thought. Then he pointed at the Ring doorbell camera mounted next to our front door and made a joke about it. Said something about how those things must drive people crazy with all the notifications, especially around the holidays with all the delivery trucks coming and going. I laughed and told him he was right, that I usually turned off the motion alerts when we traveled because otherwise my phone would blow up every time a squirrel ran across the porch. He chuckled at that and said it made sense that there was no point in getting notifications you could not do anything about. Anyway, I even mentioned that our neighbors, the Mendozas next door, had the same system and probably did the same thing. He thanked me for the chat, wished me safe travels, and moved on to the next house. I went back inside feeling good, thinking about how nice it was to live in a neighborhood where people still looked out for each other. I had just handed a stranger a complete blueprint of our security vulnerabilities. We left for South Carolina around noon that day. The drive was uneventful. Hannah slept for most of it, and we arrived at her parents' house just before dark. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were great, exactly what you would expect. Good food, her mom's homemade pie, her dad complaining about football, the whole routine. I barely thought about the house back in Charlotte. I checked the Ring app once or twice out of habit, but like I told Santa, I had turned off the motion alert, so there was nothing to see, just a still image of our empty porch with the wreath on the door. We were supposed to drive back on the 27th, but Hannah's mom convinced us to stay an extra day, so we did not leave until the morning of the 28th. I remember feeling relaxed on the drive home, thinking about how nice it was to disconnect for a few days. That feeling lasted until we turned onto our street. The first thing I noticed was the Mendoza's front door standing wide open. It was maybe 40 degrees outside. Way too cold to have your door open like that. Then I saw Phil Mendoza standing in his driveway talking to a police officer. His wife Carmen sitting on the porch steps with her head in her hands. My stomach tightened. I pulled into our driveway and got out. And that is when I saw our front door. It was closed, but the frame around the lock was cracked and splintered. The wood pushed inward like someone had forced it open. I just stood there staring at it for a few seconds, not fully understanding what I was looking at. Hannah came around from the passenger side and grabbed my arm. She said my name, but I could not answer her. I walked up to the door and pushed it open, and the inside of our home looked like a tornado had gone through it. Drawers pulled out and dumped on the floor. Couch cushions thrown aside, the TV gone from the wall with just the mounting bracket left behind. They had taken Hannah's laptop from the office, my PlayStation, a small safe I kept in the bedroom closet that had our passports, and about $400 in cash. The jewelry box on her dresser was emptied out, including her grandmother's ring that she never wore because she was afraid of losing it. Cabinets in the kitchen were open, and I later found out they had taken a bottle of whiskey and some of Hannah's prescription medication from the bathroom. It was not just robbery, it was violation. Someone had gone through every room in our home, touched everything we owned, decided what was worth taking and what was not. Hannah started crying in the hallway, and I remember feeling this weird numbness, like my brain could not fully process what I was seeing. I called 911 and a patrol car showed up about 20 minutes later. But by then, I had already talked to Phil next door and learned that we were not the only ones. The 7 houses on our street got hit that week. 7, the Mendozas, us, the Lawsons, down the block, an older couple named the Burks on the corner, and 3 other families whose names I did not even know at the time. The pattern was obvious once the police started putting it together. Every single house that got broken into belonged to someone who had been away for Christmas. Every single one had told the guy in the Santa suit about their travel plans. Phil Mendoza told me he had a full conversation with Santa about driving to Florida to see his brother, even mentioned which days they would be gone. The Lawson had talked about flying out on Christmas morning. The Burks told him they were spending the week with their daughter in Virginia. All of us had stood in our driveways or on our porches and given this stranger our complete schedules, and he had written it all down somewhere in that big red velvet bag. The cops told us later that he probably had a notebook or a phone in there, keeping track of everything while he smiled and handed out candy canes. The detective who took over the case was a woman named Ree, and she was the one who finally explained how it all worked. She said this kind of thing was more common than people realized. Criminals using holiday disguises to scout neighborhoods because nobody suspects Santa Claus. She told me that the guy had probably walked our entire street in under 2 hours and collected enough information to plan a week's worth of burglaries. The costume gave him the perfect cover. People invited him into conversations, took photos with him, let their kids hug him. Nobody asked for identification or wondered why he was there, because the Santa suit answered every question before it could be asked. Detective Reese said they had found similar cases in other states. Guys dressing up as delivery drivers during the holidays, fake charity collectors, even people pretending to be carol singers. The holiday season makes everyone trusting, she said, and predators know how to exploit that. I sat in my ransacked living room listening to her explain all this, and I kept thinking about how I had smiled at him, shook his hand, wished him a Merry Christmas. The worst part was the conversation about the cameras. I could not stop replaying it in my head for weeks afterward. He had brought it up so casually, like it was just small talk. Just a friendly observation about modern technology, and I had answered him without thinking, told him exactly how to avoid being recorded. I even mentioned the Mendozas, pointed right at their house, and said they probably did the same thing. When Phil found out about that, he did not say anything to me, but I could see it in his face. His wife, Carmen, would not look at me for months. I had basically drawn a map for the guy, told him which houses were vulnerable and when they would be empty. Detective Ree said I should not blame myself, that these people were professionals and knew exactly what questions to ask. But that did not make me feel any better. I had spent years building a life in that neighborhood, and in one 5-minute conversation, I had helped destroy the sense of safety that everyone there used to feel. They never caught him. That is the part that still keeps me up at night sometimes. Detective Ree called me a few times over the following months with updates, but they never led anywhere. A couple of neighbors had taken photos with him, but the beard and the hat and the glasses he was wearing made identification almost impossible. One of the Lawson kids had a picture where you could see part of his face, but it was blurry and taken from a low angle. The police checked pawn shops, online marketplaces, anywhere stolen goods might show up, but nothing from our street ever surfaced. Whoever this guy was, he knew what he was doing. He probably sold everything out of state or had connections that kept the stuff off the radar. The detective told me these operations were sometimes run by organized groups who targeted multiple neighborhoods across different cities during the holidays. Our street was just one stop on a longer route. That thought made it even worse. Somehow knowing that we were not special, that we were just easy marks on a list. It has been almost 2 years now, and I still think about it more than I should. We got new locks, a better security system, cameras that stay on no matter what. I do not turn off the alerts anymore, even when we travel. Hannah says I have become paranoid, and maybe she is right, but I cannot help it. Every December, when the decorations go up and the holiday spirit takes over, I find myself watching the street a little more carefully. I see a Santa at the mall, or ringing a bell outside a store, and my chest gets tight. I know most of them are just regular people doing a job or volunteering their time, but I also know that one of them might not be. That is what he took from me more than the TV or the PlayStation or the cash in the safe. He took the part of me that used to trust strangers during the holidays. The part that believed a man in a red suit handing out candy canes could only have good intentions. I do not think I will ever get that back. Story 5. Christmas Eve found me living alone in a rented farmhouse far from town. The kind of place people only pass if they're lost or looking for trouble. At that point in my life, isolation felt safer than company, and I'd chosen that house because the nearest neighbor was almost a mile away. Work had slowed down for the holidays, so the plan was simple. Heat up leftovers, keep the lights low, and let the night pass quietly. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the cold sat heavy in the air, pressing against the walls like a weight. The wind kept pushing through the trees, making the porch creak in a way I'd learned to ignore. I remember standing at the sink, rinsing a mug, thinking how silent everything felt for a night that was supposed to be warm and full. The radio hummed softly in the background, some old holiday song distorted by static. That quiet, ordinary moment is burned into my memory now. The first sound that didn't belong was a dull thud against the front door. Not loud enough to be urgent, but wrong enough to pull my attention. Another followed, heavier, like a shoulder instead of a hand. Through the frosted glass, a shadow shifted back and forth, uneven, swaying slightly. When a voice came through the door, it was slurred and thick, asking for someone by name, a name I didn't recognize at all. I answered through the door, telling him he had the wrong place, trying to keep my tone calm and steady. He laughed in a way that didn't match anything I'd said, then insisted I stop lying to him. The smell of alcohol seeped in when he leaned closer to the door, sharp and sour, even through the wood. Each sentence he spoke circled back to the same demand. He needed to see someone who wasn't there. I cracked the door just enough to see him clearly, which I regret to this day. He was older than I expected, beard uneven, eyes glassy, clothes damp. as if he'd been walking for hours. One hand kept flexing at his side, opening and closing like it was remembering something it used to hold. I told him again that nobody by that name lived there, that he needed to leave, that I could call for help if he didn't. That's when his tone changed, dropping low, accusing me of hiding her, of thinking I was smarter than him. He shoved the door before I could react, the frame splintering as it gave way. The radio fell silent when it hit the floor, and suddenly the house felt much smaller. The next few minutes blurred together, but certain details won't leave me. His boots scraping across the wood floor, knocking over a chair as he moved deeper inside. The way he kept calling out that same name, louder now, angrier, like the walls were supposed to answer him. I grabbed the only thing within reach that felt solid enough to matter, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out my own thoughts. I shouted for him to leave back toward the kitchen, every step calculated and slow. When he lunged, it wasn't with purpose, just rage and momentum. What happened after that stays locked behind a fog of noise, impact, and the smell of spilled liquor mixing with pine cleaner. When it finally stopped, the house went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. I stood there for a long time afterward, listening to the furnace kick on and off, trying to understand what had just happened inside my own living room. The intruder lay motionless near the doorway, his breathing shallow and uneven, eyes half open but unfocused. Blood had soaked into the edge of the rug, in a dark, spreading shape that didn't match anything festive about the night. My ears rang, not from sound, but from adrenaline, and every small noise in the house felt amplified. I remember noticing a crack in the wall I'd never seen before, and wondering if it had always been there. My legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else entirely. The cold from the open door crept across the floor, brushing against my ankles, and that's when I realized I was still barefoot. Eventually, instinct took over where thought couldn't. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside into the freezing air to call for help. My voice sounded wrong to me, flat and distant, as I explained that someone had broken in and there had been an altercation. I didn't know what else to call it at the time. While I waited, I watched my breath cloud up in front of me, counting each one like it might keep me grounded. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke from somewhere far off, mixing with the sharp scent clinging to my clothes. When headlights finally appeared down the long dirt drive, relief came mixed with a sudden fear of what I was about to say out loud. The people who arrived didn't ask many questions, at least not the kind I expected. They walked through the house slowly, exchanging looks instead of words, pausing when they saw the damage near the door. One of them asked if I knew the man's name, and I said, no, because I truly didn't. Another asked who he'd been looking for, and when I repeated the name he'd kept shouting, there was a brief, tense silence. I caught a flicker of recognition pass between them before they moved on. The man was taken away without ceremony, wrapped in a blanket that quickly darkened. Nobody explained where he was going or what would happen next. After that night, things changed in ways that never made it into any official report. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before started leaving food on my porch without knocking, avoiding eye contact if I saw them in town. Someone fixed my door while I was away, refusing payment and telling me it was better that way. The name the intruder had kept repeating became something people avoided, like saying it might bring him back. No charges were ever mentioned, no follow-ups made. Life moved on around me, but Christmas Eve never felt the same again. Even now, when the wind hits the house just right, I think about how quickly ordinary silence can turn into something else entirely. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in that house longer than I probably should have, trying to convince myself that leaving would mean letting the night win. I scrubbed the floor where the rug had been, even after the stain was gone, until the wood lost its shine. Sleep came in short bursts, always shallow, always interrupted by dreams where someone stood just out of sight, calling a name that echoed through empty rooms. I stopped playing music at night because silence felt easier to control than sound. Every knock, even during the day, made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. People around town acted kind but careful, like they were handling something fragile. Nobody asked for details, and nobody offered explanations either. Eventually, I asked one of the older locals about the name, doing my best to sound casual. The conversation ended faster than it began, his expression closing off as if I'd crossed a line without knowing it. He told me some things were better left where they fell, and suggested I focus on moving forward. That answer followed me home, sitting heavier than any clear explanation would have. It was then I noticed small things that hadn't registered before, like how the mailbox had once been repainted over an older name, or how the barn behind the house had been locked from the outside for years. None of it proved anything, but it all hinted at a past I'd unknowingly stepped into. I stopped asking questions after that. By the time spring started pushing through the frost, I made the decision to leave. Packing felt strange, like I was dismantling a life that never fully belonged to me. On my last night there, I walked through each room with the lights on, touching the walls, listening to the house settle. Nothing happened. No sounds, no shadows, just an overwhelming sense of finality. I locked the door, slid the key into the drop box, and didn't look back down the long drive. The house disappeared behind the trees, swallowed by distance and darkness. Some places don't need ghosts to be haunted. Even now, years later, I think about how easily I could have ignored that first knock. The official version of events never existed, and I learned to live without one. What matters is that the situation ended, and I walked away alive, carrying answers I didn't ask for and questions I no longer chase. The locals moved on, and so did I. But there's an unspoken understanding that binds us to that night. Christmas Eve still makes me uneasy, no matter where I am. Silence, I've learned, can hold more weight than any confession.